Assalamu alaikum, guys. Here we are on our last lesson of the chapter. We are on 8.7. So today you're still dealing with inequalities. The only difference is today you're going to write, you're going to solve, and you're going to graph one-step inequalities. So you've done it with equations already. Inequalities just has a little bit of a different twist to it. So please keep in mind that you're dealing with inequalities, not so much equations. So there's a specific way that you need to answer and how you need to graph and so on and so forth. So inequality rule. This is an extremely important rule when you're dealing with inequalities. The rule says this: when solving an inequality through multiplication or division of a negative number. Okay, so that means whenever you're solving to isolate the variable and you're doing inverse operations, but you are doing it through the multiplication or division of a negative number, the inequality has to be flipped, the inequality sign. So you flip the inequality sign. Now, when we start the beginning of the lesson, we're not going to apply this rule yet because we're going to learn first the basics. How do we solve? How do we graph? And then what do we need to look out for, especially when we're dealing with this rule? Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So here is our first example, and it says solve and graph. So you have an example: y minus 11 is less than or equal to negative 14. So it goes back kind of like the steps that you use for equations, inverse operations. So I need to isolate my y, and I ask myself what's happening between y and 11. Well, there is subtraction. So what's the opposite of subtracting 11? Is adding 11. So what I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So here we go. In order to get rid of the 11, I add 11. And if I'm adding 11 to the left-hand side, I need to add 11 to the other side. So on this side, it cancels out. I'm left with y. The inequality sign drops down. You've got to pay attention to addition of integers. You're adding a negative and a positive number, okay, because the 11 is positive. So remember your rules of integer subtraction or addition. When you're adding different signs, find the difference. The difference is 3. And then obviously the one with the greatest absolute value is negative 14. So then it would be negative 3. So your first answer is y is less than or equal to negative 3. The next step is that you have to graph because it's telling you to graph. So there's two parts to this. Now remember, I told you, number one, I don't need a lot of numbers on the number line. Just, if it's not done for you and you have to do them by yourself, 3 different values is enough. So now let's go back to the previous lesson. This inequality is underlined, so when I look for my negative 3, I know I'm going to darken my circle. All right, and it says anything less than or equal to. By darkening the negative 3, that includes the negative 3, and then anything to the left, make sure you darken it, and then you darken the arrow. Okay, now what does this mean? All right, so if you choose any number from negative 3 on backwards, and you substitute the value in the y, it'll make the statement true. So let's say, for example, I'm going to choose negative 4. If I put negative 4 in the y, negative 4 is less than or equal to negative 3. Well, we know that negative 4 is less than negative 3 as long as it meets one condition. When it's underlined, then my statement is true. Okay, so let's go ahead and try another one. So let's say, for example, I give you n plus 29 is greater than 49. Okay, so first step, go ahead, locate your variable, n plus 29. What's the opposite of adding 29? Subtracting 29. So subtract 29 from both sides. And here we are left with n on the left-hand side is greater than, and then 49 minus 29 is equal to 20. So my first answer, n is greater than 20, and then the next one is I need to do my number line. So remember, I'm using 20, 21, and then 19. I look at my inequality, pay attention, is it underlined or not? In this case, it's not underlined, so I just circle my 20, and then I shade anything greater than 20. All right, And don't forget to darken the arrow at the end. So if I choose, let's say for example, number 21, because the darkening of the line, and the arrow means any value greater than 20 will make this statement true. Choose 21. 21 is greater than 20. That is true. Okay? So now let's go ahead and do a couple more. Well, actually, I'm going to show you 3 more. I have 3x is greater than or equal to negative 21. So locate your variable. It's on the left-hand side. What's happening between 3 and x? It's multiplication. Opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3. On the left-hand side, they cancel out. I'm left with x. My inequality drops down. Now remember, we're still not applying the rule about flipping the inequality sign because I'm dividing both sides by a positive 3. Just because the number negative 21 is there, the rule doesn't apply. The rule is if I'm dividing or multiplying both sides by a negative number, and in this case I'm dividing by a positive 3, my inequality remains the same. Then negative divided by positive is negative. 21 divided by 3 is 7. So the first part of my answer, x is greater than or equal to negative 7. And then go ahead and graph. Negative 7, negative 6, negative 8. It is underlined, so go ahead and shade. And then remember, it says anything greater than or equal to negative 7. So greater than would be to the right-hand side. And then the arrow must be darkened as well. All right, here we go with this one. Let's say that we have x over negative 5. And the inequality says greater than 12. All right, now on this one, what's happening to x? It's being divided by a negative 5. So remember, opposite of division of a negative 5 is multiplication by a negative 5. So I'm going to multiply both sides by a negative 5. And you can put it in parentheses, you don't have to, but up to you. Now remember, I am undoing the division through multiplication, so these two cancel each other out. X drops down. Notice that I'm multiplying both sides by a negative number. So in this case, the rule applies that when you solve by multiplying or dividing by a negative number, my inequality sign has to flip the other way. Okay? So then we've got a positive times a negative is negative. And then 12 times 5 is 60. So the first part, x is less than negative 60. And then to graph, here we go, negative 60, negative 59, negative 61. My inequality is not underlined, so all I have to do is a circle. And it did say any number less than negative 60. Less than negative 60 is always to the left-hand side of the number line. And don't forget to darken that arrow. Okay? Now we've got one more example before we apply it to real-world issues. So far it's been easy, guys. It's things that you have done. You just gotta remember that rule about the negatives. Okay? Now, this one is a little bit of a special case, and be careful when you encounter this. This might not be on your worksheet, but it might be on your quiz or your test. Okay, 48 is greater than or equal to negative 4w. So I need to look for my variable. My variable is on the right-hand side, and it's being multiplied. W is being multiplied by a negative 4. What's the opposite of multiplying by a negative 4? Is dividing by a negative 4. So I'm going to divide the right-hand side by a negative 4 so I can get rid of it. And I'm also going to divide by negative 4 on the left-hand side to get rid of it. So divide by negative 4 on the right, divide by negative 4 on the left. So let's start on the left. A positive divided by negative is negative. And then 48 divided by negative 4 is negative 12. Now remember, I am dividing both sides by a negative. This inequality sign has to flip, okay? Now right here, the division of -4 undoes the multiplication of -4, so that cancels out. I'm left with my variable. Now, if you try to graph with the inequality the way it is, likelihood is that you'll make a mistake. Whenever you answer an inequality, guys, you cannot have the variable on the right. Always, proper algebra is to put the variable on the left. So how do I rewrite this? All you have to do, pretend like you're in Arabic class. Remember, in Arabic, you read from the right to the left. So let's read it. W, and then if we're reading backwards, is greater than or equal to -12. So you just rewrite it, but flip it, basically. So W is greater than or equal to -12. All right? Again, when you have your variable on the right, read it backwards. W is greater than or equal to -12. So then graph, it's -12, -11, -13. Now my inequality is underlined, so it includes -12, and it says greater than or equal to. So anything to the right, and I must always shade the arrow because it does matter in inequalities. Now, how do we apply this to real world issues? Here we go. So we have two word problems. Here we go. And it says, and let me move it up a little bit, guys, so you can see the bottom of the paper when it's solved. Let me move it up as high as possible. So we have the first problem. It says, Rami is taking 3 of his friends to a baseball game. He has no more than $24 to spend on snacks. It says write and solve an inequality. So we need 2 answers to determine the most he can spend on each person. All right, so first of all, I need to choose a variable. My variable for me, I'm going to use S because we're talking about spending money on snacks. You can use X, you can say D for dollars because he's going to spend dollars. Up to you what the variable is. But for me, I'm going to go ahead and say S for spending on snacks, okay? So here we go. I'm going to go ahead, actually, let me get it. No, this is fine. So we're going to say S for spending. That's just for me to keep track of it, right? Then the next thing is Rami is taking 3 of his friends. How many people is that? That's a total of 4 people, right? Now, it also says that he has no more than $24. No more. So that means he cannot spend more than $24. I know that 24 is the maximum, and I know that he cannot spend more than 24. So whatever he's spending has to be less than. Now, can he spend exactly $24? Yes. So then I can use the inequality less than or equal to. Remember, it's a total of 4 people, and he's spending on 4 people, right? So my inequality is 4S is less than or equal to 24. Now, if I'm going to solve, all I have to do is divide 4 on both sides because 4S means multiplication. And then the opposite of multiplication is division. So S is less than or equal to 6. All right? So remember that we had to write an inequality and that we also had to solve it. So my final answer, 4S is less than or equal to 24. This is my inequality. Now, when it comes to answering and interpreting this, you cannot just put S is less than or equal to $6. Okay? So what does it exactly mean? You have to use words. So one of the answers, and there's not only one answer, there's more than one way to say it. At most, $6. In other words, he cannot spend more than $6 per person, right? Otherwise, he's not going to have enough money. You can say no more than $6. You can also say $6 or less. As long as it makes sense and it's relative to what you are describing in the word problem, it's fine, okay? So remember, interpret what this solution means. At most $6, $6 or less, or no more than $6, okay? So let's get to the other one. To get a good grade, oh, I forgot here. No, to get a good final exam math grade, Aisha says that she must study over 5 hours. So she has studied 1.5 hours. Again, write and solve an inequality that determines the number of hours she still needs to study. So we need to look for the total. We know that she needs to study over 5 hours. That's very important. We know that she has already studied 1.5 hours. And then we need to also choose a variable. Variable here, I'm going to use H for hours, okay? So I know that she has to study H number of hours. I know that she has already studied 1.5 hours. And then I need to interpret the studying of over 4 or 5 hours, okay? So what does the word over mean? Obviously anything greater. It could have said above, anything greater, right? Greater than 5, okay? Now, inverse operations. How do I get rid of the 1.5? And just think about it before you start solving this, just does my inequality make sense? If I take the unknown number of hours and if I add 1.5 hours, how much more do I need to study, or she needs to study, to make it above 5 hours? And in this case, it does make sense, right? So I'm going to subtract 1.5 from both sides. So it cancels out here. I'm left with H is greater than, and then if you have to go on the side and solve what is 5 minus 1.5, we should get 3.5. So what is our final answer? Our final answer, first of all, our inequality. H plus 1.5 is greater than 5. That's the first part. The next one is interpreting that H is greater than 3.5. So what does it mean? More than 3.5 hours, and that's what you write. More than 3.5 hours. And that's the final answer. So don't leave it with a variable, guys. Go ahead and explain it in words, and that's the expectation of this lesson. Inshallah, you find it easy. It's not really that hard. I think the one that kids forget most, or students forget the most, is the interpretation by words of the solutions to inequalities in real world problems. So we'll see you in class if you have any questions. Assalamu alaikum, guys.